And she thought everything was going fine until she got rumor that the National Lincoln Monument Association was going to still continue their plans to build the big monument on the Mather property. And I'd like to read you the members of this group. There were quite a few of them, and all very influential people. Governor Richard James Oglesby, Lieutenant Governor William Bross, Secretary of State Sharon Tyndale, Auditor Orland Henry Minor, Treasurer James Hoy Beveridge, Superintendent of Public Instruction Newton Bateman, Attorney John Todd Stewart, Judge Samuel Hubble Treat, Jesse Kilgore Dubois, I think he pronounced it Dubois, Ozias Mather Hatch, General John Alexander McClernand, William Butler, James Cook Conkling, Thomas J. Dennis, the mayor, of course, and others they said it might be appointed. Those turned out to be John Williams and Samuel H. Treat and Jacob Bunn, another appointed member for the executive committee. They were determined to continue to build a monument on the Mather property. And Mrs. Lincoln kept saying, and she told Robert that, informed the committee that she would not accept a place of burial on the Mather property. And the word got out that she had something against Mrs. Mather, which in 1874 she denied vehemently. They went to the same church and they attended the same social events. That had nothing to do with it. Excuse me. She simply wanted to bury him in a nice, quiet spot. A committee of 2 from the Monument Association went up to Chicago to try and see Mrs. Lincoln on the 12th of June. Now, the funeral's all over and everything, and she's assuming that everything is settled about the final burial. And she refused to see them. So the committee went back to the Tremont House and on the 12th and wrote a letter to her saying they certainly wish she would change her mind. Well, she didn't. So on the 15th, she said that by the 15th, if they hadn't agreed to bury him in Oak Ridge Cemetery as a permanent resting place, she was going to take the body back to Washington. So John Todd Stewart called an emergency meeting of the committee, and he asked the question, do we agree to allow Mrs. Lincoln to have her wishes, or are we going ahead and build a big tomb on the Mather property? Well, I don't think you'll find this in any textbook. I went through the minutes of the association to find this. And when the question was asked, those giving their approval were Oglesby, Bateman, Stewart, Hatch, Williams, Beveridge, Bunn, and Dennis, for a total of 8. Those that opposed allowing Mrs. Lincoln to bury him in Oak Ridge, Tyndale, Minor, Treat, Du Bois, Conkling, and 2 late appointees to the association, Dr. Samuel Houston Melbourne, who had been Lincoln's druggist, and David L. Phillips, U.S. Marshal. The vote turns out to be 8-7 in favor of Mrs. Lincoln's wishes. Can you imagine what had happened if one more vote had changed? Springfield would not have the Lincoln Monument today. One vote changed, just one, 8-7 in favor of Mrs. Lincoln. Well, anyhow, in January of 1867, William Mather sold that entire square. It was in January of 67. I assumed in my ignorance that they would have already torn down that temporary tomb because they had torn down the Mather property. And on the 11th of June in 68, they began building the new current state capitol. Well, in July of 1867, just 6 months after Mrs. Mather had already sold the property to the state of Illinois, a correspondent appeared in Springfield from Cincinnati. And he made his headquarters there with Billy Herndon's law office on the west side of the public square. And then he toured all of the Lincoln sites. And I was particularly interested in what he wrote when he went to the Lincoln home. The Tiltons were still there, the railroad magnate. and they had been very cordial to basically soldiers that wanted to visit the home while they were at Camp Butler during the Civil War. And they kept a guest register. Excuse me. And this correspondent, who was nameless, leafed through that, and the thing that interested me is he found one entry there, and he said, "I'm the veritable Taipei of the book that had been written in such a experience of the South Sea adventures." He was one of the companions of the author. Then he went back to the 5th Street there, and he took the cars out to the cemetery at Oak Ridge. And by this time, of course, they had built a temporary little tomb on the brow of the hill where they had moved Lincoln's body and Willie's body and interred them there until they could get the monument done. Well, the tomb is finally completed in '74, and I always like to think of the fact that the committee invited President Grant to come and dedicate the tomb in '74, and almost like the Abraham Lincoln Association having a spare, for a speech in case the president didn't come here in 2009. They invited Governor Oglesby to make the main address. And imagine their surprise when a special train pulled into Springfield, and there was President Grant. And he said, for his old commander-in-chief, he couldn't be denied making a final tribute to him. So he spoke there in '74. The tomb was finally completed years later. Well, anyhow, we've skipped forward to August the 1st in 1930. State capitol, of course, is never completed. No state capitol is ever really completed, but it certainly is in the finished stage. And state employees are building a tunnel, a ditch from the power plant, which is on the north side of Monroe Street, across the street into the state capitol. And 40 feet north of the north driveway and slightly to the northeast of that portico, they ran into the unused Lincoln tomb. It was still there.